Dr. Peterson, first, thank you for coming. And so I'm Chinese. My parents grew up in the Cultural Revolution of China. So I took particular attention when you mentioned in multiple occasions comparing what's happening in the West right now to Mao's China. And I agree, and it's pretty obvious, the connection between their ideology, the identity politics, and the oppression versus oppressed viewpoint. But my question is mostly about how they're promoting the political agenda. I mean, I see that the political agenda, the philosophy behind the political agenda are very similar, but at the same time, I see a shocking similarity in the way that they're promoting that political agenda. Specifically, back in the Cultural Revolution, anyone who dared to say anything that it's not fully for the movement was classified as anti-revolutionary, just as now, anyone who dared to say anything that goes remotely not fully aligning with whatever they want to promote is classified as hate speech, although it has nothing to do with hating anybody. So since the same thing is happening here and in Mao's China, what would you say, what do you think is the connection between the philosophy and their idiotic, oversimplifying and tyrannical way of trying to promoting it?
Well, the first thing we should make clear is that there is such a thing as hate speech, right? Like, let's not be naive about this. And you can use words to inflame, and words can be very dangerous tools, and people use them in hateful manners all the time. That's not the issue. That's obvious. The issue is whether or not you should regulate that, and even more importantly, whether the state should regulate it. And the reason that's an issue is because who's going to define it? I'll tell you who's going to define hate speech. It's the people who are doing that are going to define hate speech. And right now, they're defining you sitting in here as hate speech. I mean, that's exactly what's going on while we sit here. It's like, who would be interested in defining the parameters of hate speech? Here's the answer. The people that you would least want to have adopt that responsibility. And hate speech, it's like, well, let's say I was interviewed a while back and the journalist asked me, well, why should your right to offend trump someone's right to be secure? It's like, okay, well, let's say I'm talking to one person and you might say, well, I don't have the right to offend them. It's like, all right, what if I'm talking to 10 people? Do I have the right to offend one of those people when I speak to them? What if it's 1,000 people?
So what you're saying is...
Look, you can't have a conversation about something serious without offense. Like, if I'm thinking about something serious, like, I offend myself. You know, and I seriously mean that. I really mean that. So, like, if I'm laying out a set of hypotheses, for example, about a complex social problem, I might lay out 20 hypotheses, and maybe 2 of them I think, God, I hope that's not true. But, like, maybe it is true, you know? Sometimes you discover things as a social scientist that you wish weren't true, and those are usually the things that you've discovered that are actually true, right? Because they violate your assumptions. So you can't even think if you're not willing to offend yourself. That's what thinking does. If you're ever talking about something wouldn't be serious if it didn't have the possibility of frightening and offending people. That's kind of like the definition of seriousness. It's like, well, we can only talk about things that no one ever gets upset about. It's like, well, then it's like you're trapped in an elevator for the rest of infinity listening to nothing but music. Yeah, that's a kind of hell, man. If you're going to think, and also if you're going to speak, you're going to offend people. You're going to go after their deepest presuppositions, and your own as well. You're going to shatter them at times. It's going to be brutal, absolutely brutal. And you all know that because every single one of you has had a serious conversation with someone that you love. And the probability that that was an easy conversation and that either of you escaped without offense and terror is 0. If you haven't had a conversation like that, well, you're not human, right? I mean, right. Because everyone has conversations like that all the time, except when they run from them, which is most of the time, and no bloody wonder. You know, real conversations are, there's nothing worse than a real conversation except the war that you have if you don't have the conversation. That's basically how it goes.
I just want to underline Jordan's first point, which is really that it's a very dangerous thing. Any legal rule that relies on some kind of reasonableness, because reasonableness lies in the eyes of the beholder. I mean, those people out there think that you guys are uttering hate speech. They think that you guys should be the one who are arrested. And just imagine if they were the ones who had the reins of government power. It's all very well to think of hate speech as a reasonable idea, but as soon as you give up the control about what that means, you're liable to run into real trouble. Next.
Hello, Mr. Peterson. My name's Zachary Milligan. First off, I'd just like to start by to actually thank you for all the hardship and troubles you've endured, for standing up for our rights and being a part of this debate. I come from a dairy farm in Napanee, rural, raised conservatively, and my question is, in the face of when we have a social situation so divisive, when you genuinely believe what you're doing is the right thing, in this particular instance, since you have experience with it, what would you say, is there a more effective, I don't want to say an easy way to reach out for them, but what do you think is the best way to try and talk some sense into those folks outside in a one-on-one setting?
So the first thing is I don't necessarily think that what I'm doing is the right thing, because, you know, you have to be careful when you make a claim like that. But I can tell you one thing. I'm not going to let anyone stand in the way of me trying to figure out what the right thing is. That's the thing. And then I would say, we're doing exactly what we should be doing. Right now, in this discussion, it's just exactly right? I mean, admittedly, we have to talk over the noise, but that's really not that big a catastrophe. And everybody in here is comporting themselves in a reasonable manner, and we're trying to struggle our way through the topics, and we're asking questions, and we're trying to have a genuine dialogue about them, and that's what we've got. We've got three things. We've got negotiation, we've got slavery, and we've got tyranny. And those are your choices. And so this is negotiation, right? That's public discourse. And the reason that freedom of speech, thought is obviously important. Everyone can understand that. You might say, well, you don't need to speak freely because you can think. Who's going to get inside your head? But the problem with that is that that's not it. You can't think very well because there you are in your little world, you know, with all your biases and your ignorance. You're wrong about so many things, and you're going to learn it really painfully. And then maybe you can trot out some of the things you think erroneously and ignorantly, and other people will give you a tap on the side of the head instead of running you over with a freight train, right? They'll give you a little tap on the side of the head, and maybe you'll walk away a little smarter. And that's why freedom of speech is so important, is because a lot of thinking, especially about things that are beyond you, for whatever reason, have to take place publicly as we stumble around towards an adequate formulation of the problems that beset us. So I would say, well, in this book I have a rule, I think it's Rule 8, which is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. I would say, well, that's another reasonable way to start approaching the situation. Is it's not so easy to tell the truth, because, like, what do you know? You know, you can't come out and say, well, here's the truth. But I know what one thing you can do, which is when you know that what you're saying is a lie by your own standards, you cannot say it. And you can have a consultation with yourself, and you can try to learn to say those things that make you strong instead of saying those things that make you weak. And you contribute to the health of the public dialogue in an incalculable manner that way. I mean, this is another issue that pertains to the dignity and importance of the individual. How you conduct yourself in your life is way more important than you think. And I mean, I think that that's a daunting idea, because, you know, let's say you're nihilistic and life is meaningless. It's, well, what's the payoff for that? I think, well, there's no payoff. It's like, well, yeah, there is. You have no responsibility. that's a pretty decent payoff. I mean, you have to pay the price of meaninglessness, but it doesn't matter what you do. Well, we'll flip that over and say, no, sorry, you're wrong. Your life is meaningful. It's way more meaningful than you think, but you have to bear responsibility for your thoughts and your actions. It's like, there'll be plenty of meaning in that. Well, that if you understand that properly, that will cleave you to the depths of your soul. And maybe you learn to speak carefully and to act carefully. And that will have a beneficial effect on everyone around you. You're far more powerful in the place you stand, in the place you sit and stand than you think. And I think everyone has an intimation of that. And if you don't think that's true, then try treating people around you as if it's not true. Try treating people that you know in your life as if they don't matter. And just see what kind of response you get. People are not going to be happy with you, not in any sense whatsoever. You'll ruin all your relationships. You have to treat people as if they matter. And maybe you have to treat them as if they matter because maybe they do. And that goes for you too. And so if you matter, then you should act like you matter. And that's a very daunting proposition, that's for sure.
And